I said this to Max. We were chatting in Barcelona. I said they were maybe the 10 best laps you've ever driven in your life in a row. And he looked at me and he thought about it and he sort of smiled and said, "Nah, hadn't thought about that, but yeah, a bit like that, because I don't think anyone had said that to him. And I stand by that. I think his unbelievable consistency in Canada over those 10 laps was amazing. It's like having a great golf swing, but the wrong grip. That's what it's like with Mercedes at the moment, it seems to me. They've got all the basic requirements for the dynamics of the golf swing. It's just that when the club face is hitting the ball, it's 3 degrees offline because they've never got the grip right. I cannot recall a situation where a driver is winning Grand Prix for a team and has been told that he's racing for that team throughout the year and will be sacked at the end of the year. As I think you and I have discussed before, it's a bit like saying to your wife, look, I'm really in love with you. It's wonderful, but I'm going to divorce you in 3 years' time, okay? The great drivers, and I'd include Max here, have this, so it's almost like they're anchored to the circuit and what they have to do. And there's no way they will ever do anything beyond that with the anchor. Obviously, they make mistakes. Obviously, Max loses concentration. But I'm just talking about recently, as we've seen Max, it's unbelievable concentration under pressure and also under necessity, as in Canada.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the goatiest F1 mind in all of F1 history. You know him as Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very well, Cam, and you?
I'm all right, Peter. I'm all right. There's a lot going on in this weird and wacky world that we call F1, isn't there? Talk to me about this Grand Prix this weekend past. What was the biggest story in your humble opinion, sir?
That's a good question. The biggest, so there were so many good things going on or interesting things going on. The most significant thing, I suppose, that McLaren were as quick as they were on a circuit like Barcelona, which in my mind I had sort of pigeonholed as a Red Bull back to square one. This is the greatest car on the planet type circuit, and yet when it came down to it, Lando was on the pole, and when it came down to those last 10 laps, a bit like the 10 laps in Canada, which was the decisive part of the race, he was, remorselessly catching Max in virtually every dimension. And as I said in my video last night, we'll never know for sure how much margin Max had, but he definitely cut it fine. I mean, 2 seconds as they cross the line is not really what you'd want, bearing in mind how effective DRS can be at the end of the straight there in Barcelona. So yeah, full marks to McLaren for getting the car as good as it was. Over that bump, particularly going into the last corner, it's always going to be a difficult part of the Barcelona lap. And Red Bull definitely had that sus from early on. But McLaren always had that grip in sector two, traction, turn in, lots of good things going on in the slower stuff. And Red Bull spent most of the weekend trying to get the car to work there without really compromising their pace in sectors 1 and 3. I'm sure they came up with the right compromise. I mean, they are Red Bull after all, but the compromise they had to reach was just enough to do the job, providing Lando messed up the start and used up his new set of soft tires with that poor start, which meant that it was a double whammy for Lando there and a double whammy plus for Red Bull, if you like, because obviously Max had his new set saved for the last run. So it was very close. And as I said yesterday, I think, all things being equal, if Lando had made the proper start and used those soft tires, that new set, as well as they should have been used, then I think he would have won that race.
Oh, so let me pitch this question at you this way, then, Peter, by extension. Did Lando Norris lose the Spanish Grand Prix, or did Max Verstappen win it?
Lando lost it. Lando lost it because he had the pole and he had a new set of tires on the grid, which Max didn't. Max chose to run them at the end. A good choice, as it turned out. But in order to benefit from being on the pole and having that new set of tires, you've got to make a decent start and you've got to be leading into the first corner and lead the race. And that didn't happen. Looking at it, his reaction time was not bad at all compared with Max. And so it looks like there was something going on with the acceleration run of the McLaren Mercedes through the intermediate gears before they got into really high speed stuff. And that was something that obviously hadn't shown up on any of the data, any of the telemetry. They do enough practice starts and burnouts on the formation laps and on the grid at the end of all the other practice sessions. So it was a strange one. If it wasn't, I mean, Lando's done enough decent starts to be able to get it off the line. It wasn't nerves because being on the pole, as it were, because his reaction time was pretty good. So I don't know. Maybe there was something going on with the clutch usage. Unlikely, but possible. But he did lose it there, and I think Max conversely won it again with his unbelievable consistency in the last phase of the race when they were back on soft tires at a time when it was a different thing to Canada, when he had to sort of pull out a lead from Lando without making mistakes after the safety car being deployed. But in Spain, it was a different thing because he was in defense, and it looked as if Lando had a better car, better balance, better usage of tires, whatever it was. And the pressure then on Max was to make no mistakes, despite the pressure, despite the diminishing gap that he could obviously see by sector between him and Lando. And he did that beautifully. I mean, he was within a tenth of every sector time for 10 straight laps, which is impressive, bearing in mind he's trying to find the perfect envelope to position the car on. And at the same time, whatever he does, Lando's going a tenth here, tenth there quicker.
Unbelievable, Peter. Honestly, I'm amazed. Bernie Collins spoke as much to this. She was talking though about the pit stops that McLaren, as far as their variability, often have an extra tenth or two as far as their quickest, but then they're often slower than Red Bull also, right? And I feel like it's a similar analogy as far as Lando and Max, their consistency over there, the last two stints in particular. Max was just like nailing it each and every single time. What do you have to do then, Peter, to beat Max Verstappen as at June 2024? How, like, where's his Achilles heel? How do you get at him if you're Lando?
Well, of course, that's a very good question, Cameron. And I think I was thinking about it today, actually, or this morning, because you'd say on the back of what we just saw in Spain, oh, well, Lando's going to win the Austrian Grand Prix. But of course, Red Bull are no mugs, and nor is Max Verstappen. So they'll be talking, even as you and I chat, they'll be saying, right, totally different deal. Austria, very short lap. It's all about track limits. It's all about making the car work in terms of traction. We need good top speed. We need a car that's really drivable. They'll be doing a completely different setup approach, I think, for Austria compared with Spain. Whereas I think most teams, and probably even McLaren, go to the next circuit based on the knowledge of what they've accumulated until that point, obviously bearing in mind the different layouts of the circuits. Whereas Red Bulls is completely different. Austria is a completely different circuit. We'll take a totally different approach to this. And that all comes from Adrian. That comes from Adrian from, uh, well, certainly the early Red Bull days when they'd go to a circuit like Monza and they didn't have great power. And you thought, well, they're going to be blown away there. And they put all their effort into just making the car unbelievable through the parabolica and getting a really good exit speed, which basically was enough to do the lap. They were good enough everywhere else. And then suddenly Red Bull were quick at Monza, despite all predictions. So as I say, it'd be very easy to say right now, well, McLaren have just got to keep doing what they're doing because Max is under pressure. But absolutely for sure, Max and Red Bull now are taking a totally different approach, probably to any other going into the Austrian Grand Prix. And in answer to your question, it's anticipating what they're going to do next, whilst in any way not deteriorating yourself in anything that you've got in your package, but thinking beyond the box. And that's very difficult to do.
Tough.
And it'll be fascinating to see. I mean, there's no doubt Lando will go well in Austria. I mean, he always goes well in Austria. McLaren go well in Austria, and he's going much better than they have before. So anyone not thinking they've got a very good chance of winning the race hasn't been watching. But as I say, I just don't believe Red Bull will have their eyes shut going into this one, and they'll be coming up with something a bit different. Track limits seem to be the big deal, don't they, in
Yeah.
Austria? It catches everybody out. And I can't help feeling that they'll be doing something which allows Max to have more feel curb-wise with the car, and they'll be working quite a lot on that. That's an area where they haven't been particularly good recently. Although, as I say, over the bump in Barcelona, they were really good. So I'm talking about the high speed bump.
Yeah.
But look for Red Bull to be better on curbs than they've been recently with more curb strike compatibility. And if that's the case, it's then going to come down to driving. And Did Lando make a couple of small errors in the last 10 laps in Canada when Max was getting away from him, which caused the tires to grain? Possibly. We never saw them, and maybe even Lando in his own mind isn't aware of them. But you only need to be slightly offline and just give the car a little bit too much power at the wrong moment, which Lando would perfectly correct for the graining to start. And it's the same, potentially the same in Austria. So it'll be that.
Blimey.
And I think Max, I'm just trying to think through more in what we're talking about. I think Max possibly has more just native feel, dare I say it, for the surface of the road than Lando, slightly more. He just seems to be so earthy, Max, doesn't he? He's just everything he touches and feels is all to do with racing, and it is with Lando as well. He's got this amazing rhythm that he develops and beautiful consistency. But you get the feeling that there's just some layer there between Lando and the surface that Max doesn't have. That's just obviously an abstract comment.
I love that. I'd say as well, Peter, Lando mentioned post quali that he thinks the driver that wins will be the one that on Sunday makes the least mistakes, and I thought that was Nostradamus-esque in his prophecy. And ultimately, I think if you're comparing Lando for all of the feel, I think Lando's super quick, but over the course of 24 Grand Prix, I think if you compare the two of them now, I think Max will always, or 9 times out of 10, make less unforced errors than will Lando. I think he just gets the assignment
Oh
better.
yeah, I agree with you. I would say over 24 laps, not 24 Grand
Yeah,
Prix. I think 10 laps, as I said in Canada. I think they were and I said this to Max. We were chatting in Barcelona. I said they were maybe the 10 best laps you've ever driven in your life in a row. And he looked at me and he thought about it and he sort of smiled and said, "Yeah, hadn't thought about that, but yeah, a bit like that, because I don't think anyone had said that to him." And I stand by that. I think his unbelievable consistency in Canada over those 10 laps was amazing, given the fact that he was obviously a bit annoyed about the whole safety car and his 5-second lead disappearing. And and I think that is the difference. I remember Nigel Roebuck once did an interview with Chris Amon about obviously about driving and about the perfect lap and about Jim Clark actually and how good Jim Clark was. And Chris said to Nigel Roebuck, and bear in mind Chris Amon was just about as good as it got in Formula One, super, super quick, great driver. He said to Nigel, he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "in Formula Two, it's easier to make the comparison because we're sort of, it's the cars are smaller and we're racing closely with one another." And he said, "I can be behind Jimmy and he'll be in the Lotus 48 and it's not a great car and I'll be in something else and it's not a great car, but I'll follow him and we'll be at Zolder or somewhere and I'll follow him and I'll do 1 or 2 laps and I'll think, yeah, I'm driving just like Jim Clark." And then on the fourth lap, Chris would brake a fraction too late into a left-hander or turn in a millisecond too late into a right-hander and Jimmy would be gone. And it wasn't that Jimmy had done anything special. He just hadn't made that mistake.
wow.
And it is all about that zone concentration, that it's more than just a mental thing. It's absolutely tied to this business of the zone and the great, great drivers, and I'd include Max here, have this. So it's almost like they're anchored to the circuit and what they have to do. And there's no way they will ever do anything beyond that with the anchor. Obviously, they make mistakes. Obviously, Max loses concentration. But I'm just talking about recently, as we've seen Max, it's unbelievable concentration under pressure and also under necessity, as in Canada. And call it attack if you like. Whereas Lando, I think, as good as he is and as polished as he is as a driver and as supple as he is as a driver, probably the evidence would suggest does make the odd slight mistake with his driving. And he covers it beautifully, but it's enough for Max just to get away for 1/10 here or 1/10 there. And then it's another tenth 2 laps later. And that's what Max does very well. We've seen it so often with Max Verstappen races that early on he gets the lead to a race and he's got a Ferrari behind him or a McLaren or a Mercedes, whatever it was. And they'd be right behind him they'd be literally within 0.03, 0.04. And it would stay that way for 3 or 4 laps. And then it would get to 0.7 and it would stay at 0.7 for a couple of laps. And then after about 15 laps, it would suddenly be a second, and then Max would then start to go a little bit and be 1.2, 1.4. He's so good in those early incremental stages of just keeping everything stable. And that's a talent that I think is very underrated in Max Verstappen. I think that's one of the great things about him.
Oof. Peter, he's not bad, is he? I fear for the other 19, especially those not named. Sir Lewis, Carl Davidson, Hamilton, who had a return to form this weekend past, right? He looked like Lewis of 2007. How do you characterise Lewis's performance at the Spanish Grand Prix this weekend, Peter?
Yeah, I'm not, I've always said I think Lewis is still driving as well as he's ever driven. And in a Ferrari, if it's a winning car, he'll be right up there winning races, and he's quite capable of winning another world championship. So that said, I didn't get massively excited about Lewis's drive in Spain, only because George did such a good job, to be honest. And yeah, Lewis outqualified him, which was good. So points there. But George's start and George's overtake into the first corner was just like unbelievable. And that's, if that had been Lewis, I'd be sitting here saying, wow, Lewis, that's the old Lewis. But I think, yeah, he drove really well, but let's keep it in context. I mean, I suppose I haven't looked at it at all, but I suppose outside there are a lot of people saying, Mercedes have started to get together and great results again, P3. I mean, they're no better. They're actually worse off than they were this time last year, to be honest. And, Lewis is just doing a good job in a still pretty mediocre car, in my view. And he was on the right strategy, obviously, as was Charles Leclerc. And George and Carlos Sainz got the bad strategy, if you like, the finishing on the hards. And we know clearly from the results which strategy he needed to be on. And Lewis was there and he made very good use of it. Great to see. But I think Lewis's drive was only great in the context of anybody who's been saying recently, oh, Lewis has lost the plot. He's he's never going to be the great driver that he was. But I've never been saying that. So I don't need to go out there and say now, oh, this was a great drive by Lewis Hamilton. I think it was just a standard drive by Lewis Hamilton that it was good to see. I'm sure he enjoyed being on the podium, but they were blown away by the customer team yet again. So let's keep things in perspective.
I don't hate that. I think I'm one of those people of which you talk, Mr. Windsor. I'd been disappointed. I think I was just happy to see Lewis back on the podium, right? And again, I say that with a rueful tone. I feel like Mercedes, because of their technical arrogance, failing to build a car that had the minerals to challenge for a championship, they've almost wasted, as near as makes no difference, 24 months of Lewis Hamilton's career. And I think that's a shame. I enjoy seeing Lewis with a smile on his face. If he's got a decent set of wheels underneath him, right, he'll always, even if he's having to race Ocon for 10th, he'll always smile post-race. And I think as a Lewis Hamilton fan, it was a privilege to see that smile and that radiance back on his face. I don't know. Maybe I'm over-egging it.
Yeah, no, I think it. Yeah, I get that. But what does that mean? That just means Mercedes have been doing a terrible job, doesn't it? We know how good Lewis is, and I just thought it was a bit too much overkill after the race about Mercedes are on the warpath again. I think they finished second and third last year, did they not?
Yeah, they always go well around there.
Yeah, so it's not as if they're making progress. They only had one car in the top three this time.
It's true.
And so I think there's a lot of PR out there. As I say, I think it's only the people that have been disappointed in Lewis. I don't think Lewis has been driving badly at all, and I've been saying that all along. Only the people that have been saying that, and I don't think you're one of those, Cam. Really, I mean, I think you've been. This just because you're a fan, I think you've just been disappointed that he hasn't had the results. But I mean, there's no doubt that Lewis is still a great racing driver, and it's still sad to see him not cruising around. It's still sad to see him driving hard to finish third, getting blown away by the Mercedes customer team. That shouldn't be happening.
It's farcical, Peter.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's just bad management at the factory level.
Yeah, all over. Which James Allison spoke to this week and passed it in on the Beyond the Grid podcast, saying that they were complacency was always the dragon that was gonna see the end of their 8 year domination, and that he knew when he joined in 2017 that complacency would seep him and ultimately be the end of the Mercedes Petronas AMG empire. Talk to that very quickly, Peter. How do you in a winning team? I suppose you can draw one, Williams back in 92A, but in a winning team, a dominant team, how do you stop complacency from seeping in and ending the run of dominance?
Well, historically, complacency has never been an issue in Formula One because there have been too many other issues that come in to change things. And if you want to take the example of Williams, there was no chance to be complacent, say, in the Williams Honda era, because Honda suddenly withdrew their engines. So that was that gone. And there was no chance to be complacent in 92 because we knew Bernie was on the warpath to have active ride banned. And all these things changed all the time. Or you go back to 81, suddenly halfway through the year, Williams are switching from Michelin to Goodyear. And all these factors which control the performance of a car always came into play, and you always had to try to anticipate those, but you never could, because ultimately then, even if you try to predict what Michelin or Ford or Renault or anyone were going to do next, Bernie would then still throw in a wild card and blow everything apart anyway. Slightly different these days because we have so many standard suppliers of the car, i.e. Pirelli. We've got the engine suppliers such as they are, and we know the consistency of those engines and the regulations governing their consistency and their template. So in that sense, I think James is right that the issue was complacency because of the amount of success they had. But, what is complacency? Ultimately, it's a human failing. And the job of good managers is to prevent things before they happen and to be able to read human being and human nature very well, human beings and human nature extremely well. And there's no excuse for not reading that, in my opinion. And I still come back to the conversation I had with Peter Wright in 2022, one of the world's great aerodynamicists, the man who was absolutely right there with Colin Chapman when bouncing and porpoising, whatever you want to call it, was first recognized, offering his services to Mercedes, to James Allison, and not getting a reply, as far as I can make out, or it was a negative reply. So is that complacency or is that arrogance? I think it's more arrogance, isn't it? And I know that I'm a tiny speck in the food chain when it comes to Formula One players of the ilk of Toto Wolff. But I've sent Toto Wolff 3 emails now, 3 messages saying, I know a very, very good engineer who would love to talk to your team and offer some consultancy advice. I haven't even had a reply, let alone a negative again. And again, I just wonder, I mean, and I say that not because I would expect him to respond to Peter Windsor necessarily, but if I'd sent that same message to Colin Chapman or Ken Tyrrell or Derek Gardner or Mauro Foggieri or Gerard Ducarouge, I can tell you they would have been back on the phone within a day. And yet, not because they necessarily think, oh, Peter Windsor's the great magician. It's just that knowing people and knowing good people and where they are is not an easy thing in Formula One, even today. And if some journalist or whatever you want to call me out there happens to know somebody, at least pick his brains and see what he's on about. Where's the downside? No reply at all. And it's just, I don't know, it's faceless middle management rubbish, isn't it? And it shows. And I saw one of the I think it was on F1.com. One of the quotes from James Allison was saying, and I mentioned this in my video, was saying, we were stupidly focusing on trying to solve the fast corner dramas when we should have been looking for the compromise of fast and slow. I mean, as I said, that is Formula Ford stuff. In fact, it's a disservice to Formula Ford, 1600 without wings to say that, let alone any level of competent motor racing to say that anybody would be on top of that. So I don't even understand. I can't even imagine James really believes that to be the case because it's so banal as to be absurd.
Yes.
So I think there's a whole mixture there of arrogance, of call it complacency maybe, and illogic or lack of logic because all that business of we didn't compromise enough. I mean, There's enough people there for somebody to have said, "Oh, I think we should think about the slow corners if we're going to make the car better on the fast corners." I mean, come on, give me a break.
Yeah, no, that James Allison interview is telling, Peter, because he talks about a couple of things that shocked me. The main one being that he says that they didn't realise the intersectionality between chassis, suspension and aero. And this is something that if you read Adrian Newey's book, he talks about ad infinitum. He's giving you the blueprint as to how important, especially in ground effect era, nailing that suspension is, pairing it with the chassis and the aero. It, like, how did they not know this? I just don't understand.
Well, and on top of that, bless him, Frank Durney, another good aerodynamicist, Williams, Benetton, other teams, Ligier, has always said there is no such thing as mechanical grip. Whenever anybody talks about mechanical grip, he looks at them and thinks, what are you talking about? You're telling me there's no aero? And so Frank Durney's been saying that for what, 35 years? And nobody at Mercedes even rang him up to ask him what he meant by that.
It's not good.
He's in the phone book. You can get his number. He probably still has a landline with you. He's probably in there. Not difficult to get hold of, FD. And it's, I don't know. I mean, we have this thing, don't you? You go to races or you go to the factory, whatever it is, and you look at the star, the whole Mercedes thing and the motorhome and the do not enter unless you're invited and the heavies outside and the shut garage doors and the technology and all the sponsors listed on the press releases. And it all seems so overpoweringly enormous that we're completely blown away by the immense size of a team like Mercedes. And yet here we are talking about the most basic, smallest of details to do with ultimately human nature that nobody's been able to embrace and talk about. And I suppose there's a parallel there, which is that you can have all that motorhome stuff and you can have all that garage stuff and you can have all those press releases and all those videos of the drivers doing things with the car or whatever they're doing, or the fashion shows or whatever. But ultimately it comes down to two guys racing on a Sunday afternoon and maybe crashing into one another in the first 100 meters of the race. And I suppose that's one of the beauties of Formula One. But on the assumption that that is the case, and that can happen at any given motor race, why not make sure that all the variables that you can control leading up to that potential shutdown, that basically you're on top of them and you get them all you get all your ducks in a row and you do it correctly. It's like having a great golf swing, but the wrong grip. That's what it's like with Mercedes at the moment, it seems to me. They've got all the basic requirements for the dynamics of the golf swing. It's just that when the club face is hitting the ball, it's 3 degrees offline because they've never got the grip right. And the grip is the most fundamental thing. And not only is it fundamental, it's actually easy to control because you're doing it long before you hit the ball. There's no excuse not to have a great grip. At least it's there to be done. Get it right. And they didn't get that fundamental right. That's the problem. And they still, I don't know, there's all this talk now, but they're probably all thinking, oh, well, let's just focus on 26. We'll do a great job in 26. We'll be back. I can tell you this. I was talking to the Red Bull powertrain guys in Barcelona. They ain't going away, and they aren't going to have a slow engine in 26. I can tell you that right now.
Oh, wow. Let's go. Because, again, that flies in the face of most of the rumour. No, you're not.
Well, I'm sure they're very pleased. I mean, pressure off. Let's hope a lot of people don't focus on them, because I think everyone will be shocked at how good that engine is.
Oh, wow. Breaking news out here, Mr. Windsor. I don't hate that.
Well, it's not breaking news because it's not fact. It's my assessment, talking to the people I know there, and it's I'm absolutely certain that's going to be a great power unit.
Wow. Because people are out here making decisions based on the assumption that Mercedes will be the race lead as far as their power unit in 2026. Mention no names. One Carlos Sainz Jr. Interesting weekend from the man from Madrid, Peter. What is going on at Scuderia Ferrari as far as their battles intra-team? Like, it feels like I've never seen Carlos Sainz come out and speak so candidly about and negatively, disparagingly even, about the driver on the opposite side of the grid. He said something to the effect of, Charles always complains about something post-race, or complains too much about things after the race. Charles contrasted, saying that he thinks Carlos Sainz, well, he knows that he's in a bit of a predicament and that he needs to do something special on the track because he's trying to attract suitors. But I'm not the right person to do it to, said Charles. Unpick this for me, Peter. Who's to blame in this Ferrari melee?
I don't think I'm not quite sure what Charles on about, because did we actually see the incident that he was talking about on lap one or lap two when he said he hit me and all that stuff? Or was that the one where Carlos went down the straight on at the first corner? Is that the one we're talking about? At
No,
turn
I
one?
think I think Charles is alluding to the one where they touched.
Well, if Charles alluding to that, I think he should be saying, I'm so happy that it was my teammate, because at least he did the right thing and drove straight on. Had that been somebody else, he probably would have been a massive shunt between the two of us. I should have given him a bit more room. I think Carlos did exactly the right thing there. And had that not been Charles in a Ferrari, I think he probably wouldn't have taken the escape road. And
Yeah,
that's why he did it, because he's playing the team game. And obviously Charles wasn't going to, you know, move over at that point. So rather than risk a massive shunt and both of them out of the race, he did the correct thing and go straight
yeah.
on. So what are they complaining about? What do they
Uh,
want to do? Just wave Charles past at any point? I
I
think he did exactly the right thing. And anyway, you can't take his position out of context. As I've said
100%.
from the start of the year, I cannot recall a situation where a driver is winning Grand Prix for a team, and has been told that he's racing for that team throughout the year and will be sacked at the end of the year. As I think you and I have discussed before, it's a bit like
Mm.
saying to your wife, "Look, I'm really in love with you. It's wonderful, but I'm going to divorce you in 3 years' time." Okay, it's like that. It's ludicrous, and to put a driver in that position, who knows how Carlos is going to react? I respect him for what he did in Spain in taking to the escape road, because had he not done that, it would have ended in tears. And that goes back to poor management between the two drivers anyway. And if you're going to do that to Carlos Sainz, you need to make sure that you've got very, very good management control of your drivers. And quite clearly, Freddie does not have that.
Yeah.
And, and Charles is getting more and more emotional all the time. I mean, what was all that business about with Lando
Lando.
Norris
Oh my gosh,
at the end of
Peter.
FP3? I mean, what was that
Oh,
all about? He
he
drove into Lando deliberately.
quite deliberately.
And he
That
and
wasn't
he
even the racing
and
line.
what happened now? I haven't actually seen if he got a fine or what.
No, reprimand and Lando
Reprimand.
was
That is ludicrous. It's absolutely,
nonsense.
that's one of the most dangerous things that you can do, is to encourage that, not that specific incident, but to encourage that sort of behavior by senior Grand Prix drivers is the worst possible message we can give to the next generation. And for him only to get a reprimand, well, it's just as bad as just giving Seb Vettel a rap on the knuckles for driving into Lewis behind the safety car. No different. And I think it's completely wrong. And Charles, I'm surprised that he is as emotional as he is. He should be he's obviously emotional because he wins Monaco and then the car's horrendous in Canada. They
Yeah,
don't know why. And then all of a sudden, he's having to drive absolutely on the limit to be quicker than Carlos around Barcelona. And he's not happy about it. But
yeah,
he's got enough good people around him now to keep him on the ground, keep his feet on the ground. And I imagine he has. I mean, I know he has from the Ferrari side. I wonder about the Nicholas Todd management thing, but who knows? Nicholas is probably doing a very good job commercially for him, I imagine. But for Charles was too emotional, in my view, in that race. And he should be thinking, I know Carlos is going through a lot, and I need to make allowances for that. If I'm going to be ahead of him most of the time and I'm going to have a nice clean race, I need to be aware of what Carlos is doing and thinking. He should be trying to get the best from the situation rather than creating a brick wall, which is what's happening right now. I think as to sum up, I think Carlos deserves a handshake for taking the escape road when he did.
don't disagree with you, Peter. I'm loving Carlos Sainz's work of late, and I'm hoping that he finds himself in a decent team. But it seems like all of the places in teams immediately capable of winning championships of that the doors
Oh
closed.
yeah,
Right, his options are Audi, Sauber, or Williams, and
yeah, which is a horrendous, option. To me, it's always been between those two. I suppose you can throw Haas in there, but between those three or two, it's always been a no-brainer. You got to go for Audi, take the long-term view, and just grow with the team next year. See it as a year in terms of not winning races, being on the podium, but a year when you can grow organically with the team, start to kick things into shape with Andreas Seidel and trying to get the thing up and running. I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done at Audi for them to hit the ground running in 26. And Carlos would be quite good at making that happen. I suspect he probably doesn't want to do that. He probably wants to just be in Madrid and keep fit and go racing. But ultimately, it's a chance to get in there and do a sort of a bit of a Jackie Stewart with Tyrrell, or a Niki Lauda, Luca Montezemolo at Ferrari, or a Michael and Ross Brawn at Ferrari, and Carlos should see it that way as an opportunity to become the man at Audi. And he's got enough muscle there with his dad as well to get in there and be able to kick a few butts, I think. And that's what I would do if I was Carlos. But obviously, he's got to follow his heart. I just like to go back to one thing, Cameron, because you were saying, talking about the Mercedes engine, and everybody thinks it's going to be brilliant in 26. I thought the segue there was going to be, and of course, we should always remember that it was Norbert Haug that sent up that Mercedes powertrain by effectively giving Ilmor the life they had, and then creating Mercedes powertrain out of Ilmor, and all the credit for that should go to Norbert Haug. So isn't it time then for Norbert to move back to Mercedes and take over the role as team principal of Mercedes Formula One team? I thought that's what you were going to say.
Oh, Jesus, how very dare you, Peter, insinuating that it's the end of the road for Toto. But this is
it's a pretty logical thing, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, the one good thing about that whole operation at the moment is the powertrain. Who's the guy that set it up? Norbert Haug. Who's the guy that got sacked and effectively was replaced, not immediately, but effectively replaced by other management and then Toto? Norbert Haug. Okay, bring him back. We made a mistake. Oof. All is forgiven, Norbert.
Can you imagine?
That's what I would do if I was the board.
Oh, that would be absolutely.
Because it's the one thing that's worked really well, right? Yeah, right now, it is working really well.
Yeah, it's true. It's a good shout. Would they bring him back though, Peter?
No, of course they wouldn't.
No, there is no chance.
Of course. You think Toto would allow that?
No.
Forget it.
No. Also, remember the board and 33% co-owner, right? Either, I think you might have a say in that. Peter, let me ask you this question finally. And then, in fact, you've been super generous with your time. I'm going to ask you a couple question. As far as Ferrari, there's something to be said about what the teams are doing with the cars. Red Bull are brilliant at setting up that RB20 to take advantage of the weak points of any track. Clearly, into Spain, they made sure that the car was super quick coming out the last turn, knowing that all the while that the overtaking point most likely was going to be with DRS on the straight. Why are Red Bull so good at that and the other teams are still fighting with balance and tyre temps and they don't know how to set up the car? What is it specifically about Red Bull, why they know how to take advantage of the usual suspects as far as the overtaking points on any given track?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, as it happened, I think Red Bull had to compromise what they could do out of that last corner and their top speed as a result. And there's no doubt in the race that Lando had 2 to 3 kilometers an hour advantage through the speed trap. So McLaren had the better car all round, and Max was correct to say that. But they had a very good compromise car at Red Bull. Now, why do they so often get that compromise correct? Well, as much as we've been talking about aerodynamics being integral with the operation of the car, ultimately, I think it comes down to damping. And I managed Carlos Reutemann for many years, and Carlos was massively into damping as well, and used to talk to Gordon Murray and Mauro and Pierre de Pasquier about damping endlessly into the night. And I remember Carlos once, we were driving back to the hotel, and he said, Windsor, I have no problem with damping, but rebound is the thing I find very, very difficult. And I thought, wow, rebound. And I started to read up about rebound. And I'm not saying it's that Red Bull have got it right. All I'm saying is that you're going into a really deep, dark well of the unknown almost when it comes to the idiosyncrasies of damping in relation to bouncing, aero download, suspension stiffness, roll center, and all the other dynamic forces in the car. And I think Red Bull do a better job with damping, if I had to put my finger on it. And I would say they do a better job with damping because the guy that ultimately has created that car is a race engineer as much as he is an aerodynamicist, as much as he is a suspension guru. And Adrian Newey, for sure, in my opinion, has a better feel for damping and how to get the car to work than most of the engineers out there, probably all of them. To which you might well say, well, why were they so bad over the curbs in Monaco? Well, I would say because of the compromise. Ultimately, the profile of the car and the parameters of the car around which they designed the RB20 did not allow them to go beyond a certain point when it came to what they could do with the damping on slow corners. And that was to do with architecture in the car. And I think they ran as near as they could. And I think Barcelona, they got it pretty right, which is why I say I think in Austria they're going to come up with something very
Yeah,
different for everybody else, and we'll probably it's a half a chance we're going to be saying after Austria, well, how did Red Bull do that?
yeah.
Because it won't be something you'll see on the car. It
Oh,
won't be something you'll see in the driving because it'll be just like, getting the job done perfectly. But it'll be a result, and those results are what count. And will go away when Adrian leaves? Probably, because as I say, Carlos Reutemann, as intelligent as he was, couldn't get his head around rebound. So, I can't imagine that there are many engineers in the world that understand damping as well as Adrian.
jeez. It's that they've done the anti Ferrari right and designed a car that goes brilliantly well around 80% of the characteristics that these tracks throw up, and very, very poorly around a
Or
Monaco or
Ferrari.
Singapore. But
Well,
Ferrari, the opposite. Peter, they've designed a car
well,
that's brilliant at
yeah,
Monaco and
okay, but I mean, they weren't
Singapore.
as bad in Spain as they were in Canada. Give them credit for that. I mean, their improvement between Spain, their improvement between Canada and Spain was much greater than the loss of pace between Mercedes 23 to 24 in Spain, where they had two cars on the podium last year and only one this year. So
Yeah,
you could argue that Ferrari is still doing a very good job. It's a very tentative argument. I agree with you, but
yeah,
um, yeah, I mean, it was disappointing, wasn't it, Ferrari in Barcelona? They were not.
unbelievable.
They were too quick on the straight. I say that because it was a clear sign they didn't have enough downforce for the lap, and that's always a worry when you see that sort of top speed advantage they had, which they couldn't use,
Yeah,
and they were just destroying the tires.
all
And
of
it was,
those, all of those upgrades as well, Peter, that they've expedited for, meant to come in into planes at Silverstone. They bring them forward, and they've got a worse car. Well, what's the point in that?
yeah, I mean, they had the upgrades. The big upgrade was for Imola, wasn't it? And
Yeah,
the idea is that they would keep the same time management and sweet spot of the car that they've now found, yet give themselves more top speed. Now they've got more top speed, but they've lost their sweet spot with the car.
jeez,
And it seems like they just can't find the happy balance between the two.
how
They definitely
tragic.
were quicker in a straight line in Barcelona relative to the opposition than they were in Imola, but then they lost their time management.
How tragic for the championship. Let me ask you these questions very quickly, Peter, if I
Mm,
may.
mm.
What? Okay. McLaren F1 Race says, does Lando need to recalibrate his mindset if he's got a chance in hell of challenging Max Verstappen in the long term?
No, I think I think Lando just needs to keep doing what he's doing. He's a pretty self-critical guy. He'll be concerned about what happened off the line in Spain. He's pretty data dependent, I think, and I think he will be looking at data and he won't necessarily be changing anything he does as a driver. But of all the drivers out there who can take Max on in terms of consistency, although I said previously in this interview that Lando might make the odd mistake when Max isn't, I still think that puts Lando well ahead of 99% of the other drivers, and he's still extremely good in that area. Um, if you really want to be blunt, he needs to go to shorter corners, definitely, if he ever
Oof,
wants to actually race Max one-on-one in the same car and beat him. But I don't think it'll ever happen. I don't think he'll ever be in the same car as Max. Unlikely for him to be, and given the way the world is going at the moment, Formula One world. Uh, but he does have longer corners than Max. You could see that. I mean, it's one of the good things about the race in Barcelona. You could see a lot of the difference in styles showing up just comparing one driver with another. You can see how long Perez's corners are still. You can see how long Carlos's corners were compared with Charles Leclerc's and Lewis compared with George. And so, if anything else, I know this is not a question we've just had, but if anything should put the lie to this discussion about Lewis having quite long corners and quite late entries, it should be what we saw in Barcelona. I mean, he was into four. He was like half a car length inside George every
Oh,
lap, for example. So very, very nice driving from Lewis in that respect. As for Lando, he's always going to be a long corner driver, longish corner driver, but he supplements that with incredible smoothness, touch, and feel and finesse, and that's something that'll always put him in very good stead against any combat with Max Verstappen.
talk to me about the how you perceive the 2026 rules and the tech specs. Shorter cars, narrower, lighter to the tune of 30 kilograms. Obviously, we've talked about the engine, 50% combustion, 50% electric. Do you think they will make for the better racing that we've been promised as at 2022?
Well, the first thing is I don't think they'll sound much different. We've had a few questions about the sound, and I was asking about that. It may sound slightly more metallic, but not much. So don't expect any miracles there. I'm slightly confused, not only by the question, but by the state of Formula One rule making, because if you look back over recent history, there was one massive rule change which Bernie brought in because he wanted the cars to go 7 seconds quicker. They're too slow. So that was all the regs came in for that. Then there was a massive worldwide audience survey. And in answer to the question, would you like to see more overtaking in Formula One? Guess what? 100% of the people tick the box, yes. Duh. And so we've now gone down this path of we've got to have more overtaking. And that was the 2022 car. And the 2022 car was beset with porpoising, most of them anyway, not the Red Bull, but most of them were beset with porpoising, as a result of which they then had to make changes to the regulations to make the cars more physically compatible with the modern racing driver. And I say that because in the old days, you just grit and bear it. But anyway, and get it right. But anyway, there we are. And as a result of those changes, the cars developed more turbulence and became more difficult to follow. So we've now got, and that's where we're at right now. But even so, we had quite a lot of overtakes, did we not, in Barcelona?
Ton.
If indeed overtakes are the holy grail of Formula One, which I don't agree with, but if they are, Barcelona was proof that these cars are pretty good and they provide very, very good racing. So I don't think the 26 regulations actually, I don't think the premise is we want cars to make it even closer and more overtaking. As I understand the 26 regulations, it's kind of going back a little bit to the Bernie thing of, well, we got the cars now, there's pretty good overtaking. They're just a bit big and heavy and they look a bit cumbersome on TV. Let's make them a little more nimble, a little bit sharper. And if we make them a bit smaller, maybe there's even more overtaking. And I think that's whether, and obviously on top of all that, let's make them even more electrified. We'll get more manufacturers coming in, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's that. I think it's a sort of, I don't think Formula One really knows why it's doing this, apart from the fact that they have to go 50% electrification. And the next thing is, well, we just got to make them smaller and lighter. But I don't think it's because they think we've got to have more overtaking. It's because they just think the Formula One car has to look a little bit more agile and lighter. And too many annoying people like me come along and say, why does a current Formula One car weigh more than my current road car?
Oh, wow.
Which it does. My current road car, mind you, is a 65 Lotus Elan Coupe. So you
Oof.
need to bear that in mind. But
Oof.
but nonetheless, it's much lighter than a current Grand Prix car. And that's pretty ridiculous. I mean, if you'd said to that to Colin Chapman, he'd have looked at you and said, are you completely mad? Racing cars are light and agile. Anyway, we're going back into that sort of dimension now. And I think that should be appreciated and applauded. Jason Somerville's done a very good job with his active arrow and a few things coming on the car. We don't have active ride suspension, which I think is a mistake. We don't have regenerative front brakes, which I think is a mistake. But I guess that's partly because the manufacturers who are coming in would possibly be seen to have an advantage, and partly because it's just an expensive thing to do to start that new technology. So that's not coming in might come in the future, who knows? But I don't think, Cam, that it is actually in order to have even more overtaking, because we have quite a lot already, do we not? When are people going to say we've got too much overtaking? Make it more difficult. We got we got two, sometimes three DRSs at every track. We've got,
Mm,
lots of overtaking now. Even the toe effect without DRS is pretty big. And I don't know why people go on and on and on about all this overtaking business. As I've said before, if you want lots of overtaking, go and watch MotoGP or British touring
mm.
cars or something else. Formula One is what it is. Ultimately, if you want it to be a technical exercise, you want all the cars to be different. And if all the cars are going to be different, then you're not going to have it as close as MotoGP. But anyway, that's just my opinion.
Love that. Love that. Finally, Mr. Windsor, super generous of your time as always. Finally. Is Max the great equaliser in RB20? Ergo, is Checo Perez the true barometer of what that RB20 is capable of?
Well, imagine if the two drivers were Checo Perez. And I don't want to be unkind to anybody here. Obviously, we wouldn't be seeing the car doing what it's doing. And Perez at the moment, you could say, is putting Max's performance into even greater perspective and how good Max is. But I think we also need to say that Perez is suffering a little bit of a hangover from having renewed his contract, and his future in Formula One, in life, if you like, is now secure forevermore. And he's just settled back and relaxed. It's a little bit like Daniel Ricciardo doing his Renault deal and getting all that money
Oh,
and changing as a racing driver. There's a similarity there, and it's no surprise. Money, as Cyndi Lauper always said, money changes everything, and I think that's where Perez is at now. And he's got all the things that I've always been talking about. The fact that he doesn't have Max's touch and finesse into corners. He's very, very good on exits, but into corners, which is the critical part, of course. He doesn't have that. And he's never really developed that, even though he's had all these years now alongside Max. And he still doesn't really understand how Max drives the car. All that's building up now that the car's not quite as good as it has been over the last 2 or 3 years. There's a lot more pressure from opposition. If he blinks more than once, there's a Haas Ferrari ahead of him on the grid, let alone an Aston Martin or something. And and that's the problem. He's got no building blocks on which to stand as a racing driver because he's just kind of stayed the same level. And it's only going to change if the car becomes a lot easier to drive with a bigger advantage over its opposition. I don't see that happening because logically it'll be even closer in 2025
yeah.
because the regulations are at their end. There are no rule changes. Everybody's going to find a solution. By next year, Mercedes will probably be right up there with McLaren, and Ferrari might even luck into a car that's good at every circuit. So, or most circuits. So it's going to get worse, not better, in terms of Red Bull's challenge. And as I said in my video, Checo just going to the factory between races and working hard with the engineers isn't enough. He needs to be doing physical stuff where he's actually in the car, and he's getting into corners in a different way.
Absolutely. Very well
That can
said.
be done in road cars, as I've said a million times, but he's not doing
100%.
it. He's
100%. I think one comment said, owing to the unequivocal support that he gave Christian Horner, now his problem that he's dealing with Checo Perez is that there's far too much carrot and not enough stick. I think that's a very succinct way of putting his risk to reward. He's got the new contract and he's kind of settled back down. Or maybe it's just his capability, Peter. Maybe it's not
Yeah, I think
understeering enough for him and he just can't do it regardless of how much effort he puts in.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I think there's a little bit of, I've got the drive, I'm okay, and the car will come to me. And that's that. But I think, as I said, there's a much bigger picture, which is that even if he was not motivated by having too much money or demotivated by having too much money, I don't think it'd be very different actually,
Mm-mm-mm.
because he doesn't have the skill set to drive as well as Max in a car that's that difficult and that much on the edge. I'm
Absolutely.
not sure it was to do with whether he supported Christian. I think it's more to do with as I've said before, I think it's more to do with, okay, who's around, given the amount of money that he brings to the team, who and the knowledge that he has already of the sim and the guys and the engineers and how it is, who is better out there than Sergio Perez for that car? Who isn't going to give Max a hard time? Tell me a driver who's better, who brings at least as much money as Perez. Who?
Oof, that's a good
Nobody.
shout. Yeah,
Nobody.
yeah, that's a
It's
very
nothing to
good
do
shout.
with supporting Christian. It's to do with he's the logical choice. As I said before, it's a great shame that Carlos Sainz couldn't
That,
bring 20 million to Red Bull
yeah,
because he would have got the drive had he done it.
But they wouldn't have him because it would be the battle of the fathers again, as it was in
Well,
2015-16.
yeah, I'm sure I think they would have taken Sainz had he had 20 million. If he'd given 20 million to the team, I think they would have taken him.
Oh,
And I
what a
don't think there'd be
shame.
any issues about that. For sure. That's, it's one of Perez's attributes. And that shouldn't be seen as a negative because he's got that sponsorship, because he's Sergio Perez and the job he's done in Mexico as a racing driver. It's not
Yeah,
family money or anything like that.
yeah.
He's generated that money. So all credit to him for that.
Wow. Wow. Let's go Checo Perez, Carlos Sainz Jr. Peter, you've been a legend. Thank you so much. I love these conversations as always. You've been a legend, and so too do my subscribers. If
I can see it now, Cam, in the Mexican press. Windsor says that Perez has only got the drive because he took 20 million to the team. Not quite what I'm saying, but I can see the big headline now.
They will misconstrue your headlines, as they always do, Mr. Windsor. You're a headline maker, mate.
Well, I don't know about that, but I like Checo a lot. He looked in Barcelona. He was very cool. I thought on Thursday. I didn't chat to him, but I was standing quite near him. And he was wearing these really cool grey flannel trousers with cuffs when everybody else is wearing jeans, and he's wearing it with the Red Bull jacket, and he just looked fit and ready to go. And I was thinking he could go quite well this weekend if the Red Bull's pretty good. But sadly, the Red Bull wasn't that good. It was a difficult car again, and so he was on the edge. But he does drive beautifully when he does have good turn-in. He's really good on exits still. He's really good on exits. He's got a lot of very good qualities.
Absolutely. He's not a bad peddler, which I suppose he's all the more praise for.
Just one other thing I'd just like to say. If you notice that what is it called? Indy NXT. Yeah. It basically looks like British Formula 4 at the moment. It's all the ex-Boyo drivers out there doing really well.
True. I don't
It's
follow
amazing.
it.
Yeah, we might as well just move the whole thing to Brands Hatch and something done it there. God. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
I'll be there
anyway,
weekend,
Joey Foster doing his thing. Good stuff.
Love it. Peter.
And actually, Jamie Chadwick did very well, didn't she?
Correct. Won a race, a maiden race the other day.
Bryce Aaron, he was another British Formula 3 guy.
Yeah, props to them. There are plenty of young drivers waiting in the wings.
I was looking at that thinking about poor Theo Pourchaire and what he should be doing next, because he's Formula 2 champion, really good, obviously totally blown out of the water by an American who's got, a bit like Perez, brings a lot of money, but also got a bit of talent. And what does he do next? It's a very difficult question. And I was wondering whether he needs to get back on the railroad of progression in America there and earn himself an IndyCar drive by winning one of the lesser championships. But if you've already won F2, you've got to be very strong to do that. It's a very difficult question. I'd hate to see him sort of go sideways into WEC or Formula E or something, because he is good enough still to do a good job. He'd be the right young guy for Audi to be bringing along. But I guess he's burned his bridges at Sauber now, has he?
Yeah, well, who knows? I think it's a momentum. Carlos Sainz spoke to this very eloquently in an interview on the Nude Project. And he said the probability, the chance, he was talking about if he has a child in the future and whether he'd encourage he or her to go into Formula 1. He says the probability of you getting into F1, there's only so much you can control. The vast majority of the variables are outside of your control. He said people talk about F1 as if there's 20 seats. He said that's nonsense. At any one season, there's like 2 or 3 seats because only 2 or 3 drivers will leave. And worst, you've got to make sure your momentum is gathering right at the point when those 2 drivers leave. And that's exactly what Theo Pourchaire's fallen foul of. His winning F2 needed to coincide with there being 2 seats in F1, and that one of which he could take. And he's just he's been a victim of circumstance and timing, sadly. This is the weird and wacky world of F1, is it not, Mr. Windsor? But I digress. Mr. Windsor, you've been a legend as always. If you want to hear more and see more from Peter D. Windsor, go and check him out on YouTube as always, as if you're not subscribed already. If you're not, what are you doing with your life? If you want to hear more from Peter D. Windsor, go and check him out on the Short Corners podcast, available on all good podcasting platforms. If you're watching this video, do me a favor, like, comment and subscribe. If you are listening, follow and 5 stars. As always, it's very much appreciated. He's been Peter D. Windsor. I've been Cameron F1. Between now and next time, as always, remember to look but never stare.